Thanks everyone for joining this webinar about risk management in ISO 27001. Let's just wait a minute for everyone to join. While we are waiting, can you just let me know where you're joining from? So the city and the country where you're dialing in from. So I'm calling in from Zagreb, from Croatia. And how about you? If you can just let me know through this question pane or through a chat message, just to get a feeling on where all the people come from. Okay, while we are waiting for your answers, just a couple of notes. So first of all, we are recording this webinar, and you will be able to watch it from the basically and from the same page where you registered for this webinar. So basically, if you're joining through LinkedIn or through YouTube, then you have to just go back to the same page where you initially joined the webinar. If you joined actually through Zoom, then you simply go to the same page where you registered for the webinar. You'll see the recording there. Second, you'll be able to download this presentation deck, and actually I'll explain you how to download the presentation deck at the end of the webinar. So if you can stick until the end, I'll show you and actually tell you where to find the link to download the presentation deck. All right, let me just see if, yeah, okay, I see one participant from UK. This is great. Thank you for letting me know. Good. So let me then start with the webinar now. So welcome to the webinar, the basics of risk assessment and treatment according to ISO 27001. My name is 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀𝗁, and I'm the main ISO 27001, but also NIS2 and DORA expert at 𝗪𝗲𝗴𝗲𝗏. And 𝗪𝗲𝗴𝗲 is a company that makes compliance easy to understand and simple to use. And the webinar today is streamed through LinkedIn, also through YouTube Live, and it will last approximately 55, maybe 60 minutes. And I'll try to make this webinar as interactive as possible. So, if you have any questions, feel free to send them through this chat pane in Zoom, or through these, question pane in Zoom, or chat messages through LinkedIn or YouTube. And I'll actually answer your questions even before the Q&A session. I also have this Q&A session at the end, but you don't have to wait for the Q&A session. Feel free to send your questions as I go through the presentation. All right, now let's move on to the next slide. So first of all, why is this risk management important? Well, most companies actually do not understand why it is important, and of course I'll explain this in the next couple of slides. And as a consequence of this not understanding, actually they take it too lightly. They don't understand it seriously enough. And as you will see later on, basically as risk management has to come before you actually start implementing security controls. These decisions that you actually make as part of this risk management are crucial, because they determine how you do everything else. So this is the problem actually, that most companies don't take this too seriously, and then make mistakes later on. So of course, what I'll do during this webinar, I'll explain what is it exactly that 27000 requires for risk management, and I'll show you lots of tips on how to actually implement this risk assessment and treatment. And I made this webinar for both beginners, so if you're really just starting to your implementation, basically this is intended for any company that wants to implement ISO 27001. Okay, so I would say that risk management is really the first critical or the critical first step in 27001 implementation. As I mentioned, it determines actually lots of things later on. So if you actually make, I would say, or if you do this risk assessment and treatment, I would say inadequately, then you will have lots of problems later on. So you really have to do this, I would say, properly to actually have on one hand, I would say, enough controls that cover, let's say, most important risks, but then again, not too many controls so that they actually don't stop your operations, regular operations in a company. And risk management actually gives you a very good input into this actually feeling of having enough security but not too much, right? This is why it's really important. Okay, so let's see the agenda. And by the way, as I go through this agenda, let me know through chat or through question pane if you want me to focus on any of these topics. So just let me know the title of the topic, and then I'll try to spend more time on what you're interested in. Anyway, so first I'll go through this why risk management. So then I'll explain this process of risk management. There are 5 steps there. Then I'll show you what are the elements of risk assessment and actually consequently how you can write the risk assessment methodology. You will see also there are 5 mandatory elements and a couple of more additional elements. And then I'll take you through these steps of identifying assets and then vulnerabilities and threats, and then also assessing the impact and likelihood. So basically calculating the level of risk. And then after that, I'll show you what are the 4 options or 4 most common options for treating the risks. And finally, we'll go through the Q&A session. So lots of topics for today. So I'll try to speed up a little bit so that we actually can go through all of these things in this 1 hour. Right, now, why risk management, or better to say, how is risk management organized within 27001? So you can actually understand ISO 27001 as a, let's say, general framework. And within this framework, you have risk management. So as I said, this is where you assess what kind of bad things can happen to your company. And then based on these, let's say, based on these conclusions, you actually start implementing controls. And then one of the very important things is to start measure the effectiveness of these controls. And then these results are actually feeding back into when you actually do the risk assessment, you also have to set the level of objectives, so what you want to achieve with these controls. And then once you actually start implementing the controls, you have to measure if you are actually achieving those objectives that are set in the beginning. So all of these things, 3 things are very much interrelated, but as you can see, everything starts from risk management. And here you also see the names of these standards. So 27001 is, I would say, rather generic. It does give you, let's say, a clue about what are the most important elements about risk management and other things, but it doesn't give you too much detail. So if you want to learn about details, then you can read this ISO 27005. If you want to learn the details about implementation of controls, then this is 27002, and about measurement 27004. Now, if you're only implementing this standard for the first time in your company, then 27001 is going to be enough. But if you want to do this cybersecurity compliance for a living, like say as a consultant or let's say a security officer or something like that, then it's probably a better idea that you also learn these other standards. Okay, we'll actually send you a couple of links now so that you can learn more. So first of all, we'll send you this article, How to Structure Your Documents for ISO 27001 Annex A Controls. You can see the link in your chat window. And by the way, if you joined the webinar through Zoom or through YouTube, then you'll be able to click this link and it will open your browser. But if you joined the webinar through LinkedIn, then because of some limitations in LinkedIn, you can't really click this link. But the workaround for this is that you simply copy the URL. If you're in LinkedIn, copy the URL and then paste it into your browser, and you will see this link, and this basically link will open there. Okay, another article that might be helpful for this third part measurement is how to perform monitoring and measurement in ISO 27001. You also see the link now. Okay, very well. Now let's move on to this process, these 5 steps of risk management according to ISO 27001. First, you actually have to define the risk assessment methodology, and this is basically the document which describes how you're going to organize this process and what are the basic rules. because if you don't really describe this process up front, then your employees will not know how to do it, and they will do it in a very different way. So you will simply have risk assessment results which make no sense. So this is why it's important that you actually do this properly. And in one of the next slides, I'll actually show you what are the elements of risk assessment, and therefore how you actually can adapt this risk assessment according to your needs, and risk assessment methodology according to your needs. The next step is to perform actually the risk assessment, meaning that you actually have to find out what potential problems or risks can happen to your company. And then the next step is that you actually define how you're going to treat them. And at the end of the webinar, I'll show you these 4 treatment options, but the most common treatment option would be the selection of security controls. These are the controls from the Annex A that are, let's say, cataloged in ISO 27001. Okay, we'll also share with you now the link to this article called ISO 27001 Risk Assessment, Treatment and Management, the Complete Guide. And when you open this link, you will see this quite lengthy article which explains all of these things that I'm telling you today in this webinar. So all of these things are, I would say, explained in even more detail in this article on 𝘧𝗿𝗲 website. All right, now the 4th step is this statement of applicability. So statement of applicability basically is a kind of catalog, or basically a list of all the controls, where you basically say, the controls from the Annex A, so 93 controls, where you basically say which of these controls you want to apply and which controls you do not want to apply. And this is directly related to risk assessment and treatment, because in the previous step, risk treatment, you actually had to select several controls for treating the risks, right? And this is actually the input into statement of applicability, because all of those controls that you marked as applicable or that you marked actually as needed, you actually then select them as applicable here in the statement of applicability. So this is, the logical next step here. Now, statement of applicability is, I would say, a separate story, so to say. And here is an article which, here is actually a link to a YouTube video where actually I explain into more detail what is this statement of applicability, what is its purpose, and you can take a look at this video and learn more about it. And then the last step is that you create a risk treatment plan. So basically this plan is the implementation plan for controls, right? Because after you define which controls you want to apply in the statement of applicability, then you have to start implementing them. And risk treatment plan defines the responsibilities. So who is in charge of the implementation? What are the resources needed? What are the deadlines? All of these things are something that you have to prescribe in this risk treatment plan. Okay, we'll also share with you now a link to this free download. It's called Step-by-Step Explanation of ISO 27001 and 27001 Risk Management. So when you open this link, you will see also that you can actually register and download this free download from 𝘧𝗿𝗲 website. So if you want to learn about these steps, you can also take a look at this. All right, now let's move on to these elements of risk assessment. So what is it actually, what does ISO 27001 prescribe that you must have actually as part of this risk assessment? So first of all, you need to identify the risks. What does this mean? You simply have to list all of these risks that you actually find in your company. In the next couple of slides, I'll actually show you a couple of examples on how you can do it. But important thing to understand is that, of course, you need to list the risks if you want to handle them. Second element that is mandatory is that you need to define these risk owners. Basically, risk owners are people who are in charge of handling this risk, right? So it could be this could be a security officer, but this could also be, let's say, an owner of a particular asset. So this might be, let's say, a system administrator who is in charge of a particular IT system. This person can also be a risk owner. Now we'll send you a link now to an article called Risk Owners versus Asset Owners, just to understand this difference between risk owners and asset owners. In any case, risk owners are mandatory according to 27001, whereas asset owners are not mandatory. But I would say it's recommended also to have asset owners as well. The next mandatory element is assessing the level of impact. So how big the consequences would be if an incident happens. And these consequences are always, I would say, assessed through the perspective of damage towards confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So if something happens, what would be the damage related to your confidentiality or availability or integrity? So this is something that you have to take into account. Also, you have to assess the level of likelihood. So how likely is it that this incident will happen, or that this risk will materialize? And when you hear this expression, risk materialization or materializing the risk, this is nothing else but that the incident will happen, right? In any case, level of likelihood is how likely that the incident will happen. And then you can actually see here below risk identification, there are these assets and threats and vulnerabilities, and these actually suggest the way how you can actually identify the risk. Now, this is in light blue color, meaning this is not mandatory. Okay, actually the first version of 27001 back in long ago in 2005, it prescribed that you needed to list assets and threats and vulnerabilities, but this is no more mandatory. So now, if you want to comply with 27001, you can actually apply any methodology for listing the risks. However, what I see is that in majority of cases, companies are still using this asset and threat and vulnerability approach, or this is also called asset-based risk management, because it is, I would say, preferred from auditors. This asset-based risk approach is also mandatory if you want to comply with some regulations like NIS2 or DORA. So I would say the safest really approach here is to use this, I would say, mainstream methodology for risk identification. So in the next couple of slides, I'll show you actually how to list assets and then threats and vulnerabilities. And then the fifth element that is mandatory is this that you have to determine the level of risk. And the standard doesn't say how you actually calculate this or how you determine this, but the most common ways to calculate the level of risk is that you actually multiply impact and likelihood. So let's say that your level of impact is 3 and then level of likelihood is 4. 3 times 4, this is 12. Or you could also use the addition. So if your level of risk is 3 plus, level of impact is 3, level of likelihood 4, 3 plus 4 equals 7. So both approaches are perfectly fine. It really, depends on your preference, what you would like to I would say, use. Now, I also mentioned that you have to adapt this risk assessment methodology according to your company needs. And basically, you actually can see in this screen, in this slide, the elements that you can actually prescribe and determine through this methodology. So you can see okay, in our methodology that you described that you do not want to use this asset-based methodology, asset-based risk assessment, or you can say that you want to use this asset-based risk assessment. You can also determine that you want, I don't know, for impact and likelihood that you are using scales high, medium, and low, or that you're using scales from 1 to 10. All of these things are actually determined in the methodology. So basically, the methodology means that you are playing around with these elements here that you see in this slide and I would say, adapting them to what to the, let's say, real needs of your company. And while speaking of this, I would say that you should not complicate too much here. You should not make this methodology too complicated, because then if this is too complicated, then your whole risk assessment process will be longer and harder. And especially if you are a smaller company, you don't really need to add more elements than those that are displayed here. You don't need to use some overly complicated scales for risk assessment, so you can try to simplify these. And as long as you do have these 5 elements, you will be compliant with the standard. All right, now I think we can move on to the next slide. So let's see, how do you list these assets? So basically you have to think about what do you protect. So for example, you can of course have hardware, meaning your physical servers, if you have them, laptops, smartphones, all these kind of things. Software, of course, any kind of software that you're using, information, including data. So this can be, of course, in digital form, but also in, there are still some papers around. If nothing else, you have notes on paper which sometimes hold sensitive information. Infrastructure, meaning, let's say, electricity, offices, air conditioning for, I don't know, data room, for servers, and so on and so forth. So basically all kinds of things, but also people. Very often companies forget to list people as their assets, and from information security point of view, people are assets, and you have to definitely list them, because they also protect you from risks, but also create some risks. So definitely something to list there. Of course, you can list many others. And then a good practice is that you actually define asset owners, so that you know exactly who is responsible for what, because then it becomes much easier to handle those risks and actually implement all of these controls. Okay, and then the next step is actually that you find out vulnerabilities. So for example, and just before I go into examples to explain what a vulnerability is, basically a vulnerability is something that enables a problem to happen, okay? Vulnerability is, I would say, a characteristic of an asset that enables the problem or risk to materialize. So for example, if you have, let's say, an office, or let's say a physical server, then a lack of fire extinguishing system is a vulnerability related to these physical assets, right? Because if you do not have this fire extinguishing system, then the fire could go out because there is nothing to protect these assets, right? Lack of antivirus software, this is a vulnerability related to software. Okay, again, or also lack of antivirus software could be a vulnerability related to your databases. Then lack of business continuity plans, this could be a vulnerability related to, let's say, assets like your people, your offices, or something else that actually has that is, I would say, more general in your company. Lack of incident response procedures. This is something that is, again, related to, it could be related to your software, it could be related to your people, it could be related to I don't know, hardware assets and various other assets. Obsolete equipment, this is obviously related to your hardware. Again, if this equipment is obsolete, this means that it's probably not maintained well, that it can actually simply stop working, or maybe that it's not, I would say, protected enough from the, let's say, software point of view. Lack of replacement, this one would be, this is a vulnerability related to people, right? If you have some people, like, okay, again, system administrator, and no one else actually knows what to do with a particular system, then you are actually vulnerable, or your company is vulnerable to actually this person leaving your company, and you don't have any replacement. All right, so these were several examples of vulnerabilities. Of course, ISO 27001 does not tell you what vulnerabilities you have to take into account. This is simply something that you have to come up on your own. And so we'll share now a link with you on this catalog of threats and vulnerabilities. It's not already, I would say, long, but it's useful just as a kind of a starting point that you start to get a feeling on what you could use as threats and vulnerabilities when you do your risk assessment. Okay, and then threats. Basically, threats are, this is basically where you ask yourself, okay, what can go bad, what can go wrong, what can happen to those assets because they are vulnerable, because they don't have enough protection. So for example, if you have this combination of, let's say, physical server, lack of fire extinguishing system, then the threat here is a fire, right? Fire can actually take advantage of actually not having a fire extinguishing system and then set this server on fire. Computer viruses are obviously related to your software, to your databases. So again, if you don't have antivirus software, then virus can take advantage of this vulnerability and damage your asset. Earthquake, this can be a threat related to, let's say, your physical assets like offices, people, hardware, and related vulnerability could be lack of business continuity plans. Again, if you don't have any plans, then you won't know really what to do and how to react in the case of earthquake. Bomb threat, this could be again a threat related to your physical assets, to your people, and a related vulnerability there is that you do not have any kind of incident response plans. Equipment malfunction, obviously this is related to your hardware. Related vulnerability here is that you have obsolete equipment. Key people leaving the company, again, this is related to your people as asset and vulnerability that you don't have replacements. So again, you always, when you actually identify these risks, you think about, the assets, and then what are the shortcomings of these assets or vulnerabilities, and then what can go wrong, and you connect all of these three things together. When you have this connection, this is basically a risk. All right, now let's see the impact and likelihood. So as I mentioned before, this impact and likelihood is not something that is predetermined by the standard, and you can select your own scale. So for example, you can have something as simple as high, medium, and low, right? It's a very, I would say, common way to do it, and basically this is what we recommend. If you're a smaller company, you don't have to use any more elaborate scales than this simple low, medium, high. Now, if you're let's say a larger company or a more complex company, then you can actually use more complex scales, like scales from 1 to 5 or scales from 1 to 10. Especially if you are, let's say, in the financial sector, if you have to comply with DORA, or if you are, let's say, a company that has to comply with NIS 2, you have a couple of thousand employees, then yes, then you'll probably go for these scales of 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Now, what you have to be aware of is that the bigger the scale is, the slower the assessment is, because the more options. I mean, when you actually do this risk assessment with your employees, with, let's say, heads of the departments or asset owners, the more options there are, then these people will take, it will take more time for these people to make these decisions. So if you can, try to keep it simple, try to keep a short risk assessment scale. If not, then you actually go with these longer ones. As I mentioned, this impact is basically assessed based on the impact of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So, for example, if you have a threat for your, let's say that you're an e-commerce company, and that there is a threat for your, let's say, online e-commerce site, then you would actually probably focus the most on this availability aspect. So if your site goes down for, I don't know, 3 hours, then you have to calculate what will be the damage in terms of lost revenue, reputation or lost reputation, these kind of things. Then again, if you are dealing with some very sensitive information, then you will focus more on this confidentiality aspect, and so on and so forth. So basically this is something that you do as part of the assessment, assessment of impact. When assessing the level of likelihood, then this basically depends the most on how good your controls are. So the more existing controls you already have in place, the actually lower the likelihood will be. Or vice versa, if you don't have any controls implemented, then the likelihood of this incident will be much larger. Okay, now let's move on to let me actually show you now how you can speed up this whole process of listing the assets and threats and vulnerabilities. So what I'll show you is this 𝗏𝗏𝗴𝗏𝗏, and this is the, I would say, small GRC software or ISO 27001 software that you can use to implement these standards in your company. And so as you can see, it's on the screen now. So 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 basically shows you these implementation steps. I'm not going to go through them now, but one of the obviously most important features here is that you have this risk register, and this risk register shows you a kind of a catalog of potential assets you can have, and then you simply click which of these assets are relevant for your company. So you can have, office and production facilities, I don't know, servers, archives, these kind of things, IT communication equipment, you might have servers, storage media, I don't know, phones, then you have software and databases. So you basically simply click whatever is applicable and whatever you have in your company, and then when you click next, then it actually shows you what are the potential related vulnerabilities for each of these assets. And then it says, okay, for office rooms or facilities, you have, I don't know, inadequate infrastructure capacity, location of infrastructure sensitive to water leakage, and so on. Let me scroll down to some other assets. Let's say for servers, you might have, I don't know, lack of poor internal audit or of IT communication equipment, inadequate network management, and so on and so forth. Let's see, for storage media, you might have inadequate capacity, inadequate cabling, maybe, for phones, and so on. For software and databases, you might have, I don't know, software design flaw, and so on. So basically the point is that the software already suggests you related vulnerabilities, and then you simply have to click the ones that you think are relevant, and then move on next. And then in the next step, it shows you what are the threats related to each of these vulnerabilities. So, or better to say, combinations of assets and vulnerabilities, what are the related threats. So for offices, if there is a lack of access controls to facilities, then you could actually have these threats. Again, you have to simply click the ones that you think are appropriate. Let me see here for this third-party custom-made software design flaw, and then you actually have to select the appropriate threats. So again, if you're using this kind of a tool, it can speed up the whole process considerably. The next step will be actually evaluation, where you select these impact and likelihoods, and then in the treatment step, you will see that you can select the controls, and software automatically suggests you all the relevant controls for a particular combination of assets and threat and vulnerability. Okay, I'm not going to spend any more time here. Let me go back to the presentation. But if you're interested in this, we've sent you now this link to this 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. And when you click this link, you can actually sign on this page. You can sign up for a free trial. So you can test 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 for 14 days. I think it's free. Yeah, free trial is 14 days. And you can completely go through this risk register, or you can also use these templates that you'll find in 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and so on. All right, now let's move on to the next slide. And here you can actually see an example of a risk assessment table. So once you list all the assets, threats, and vulnerabilities and impact and likelihood, this is something that similar. You will get something similar to this. So let's just take a couple of examples. So let's say that you have this physical server as the asset. Let's say that you have owner, administrator, that the threat is electricity outage, and vulnerability is that there is no UPS, meaning uninterruptible power supply. Let's say that the impact on a scale from 1 to 5 would be 4, likelihood rather low, so let's say 2, and then if you use addition, as a method for calculating risk, this would be 6, right? And then for the same asset, you would have a different threat and a different vulnerability, okay? This time impact is higher, likelihood is lower, also higher, and 5 plus 3 makes 8, okay? And then you might have a completely different asset, let's say contract, meaning in paper form, the agreement in a paper form. Owner is a director, access by unauthorized persons, so the contract is left on the table. 4 plus 4 is 8. You could have again the fire, the threat. As you can see here, you have the same threat for 2 completely different assets. No fire protection, 4 plus 3 is 7, and so on. So basically this is, you know, how you actually start listing your risks. This is more or less how your risk assessment table will look like, especially if you use this asset-based risk assessment. Now, as you can see in this last column, the risk here is calculated and there are different colors. The first one, 6, is in green, whereas all the others are in red. Now, there is one very important concept in this risk assessment, and that you actually have to define the acceptable level of risk, okay? Meaning, if you, let's say, identify 100 risks in total in your company, this means that, this doesn't mean that you have to resolve all these 100 risks, because this would be like very unrealistic and very, very expensive. This means that you actually have to define out of these 100 risks, which are acceptable, which are, let's say, too insignificant to deal with, as opposed to significant risks, important risks, or unacceptable risks that you do have to deal with, that you have to reduce or control in some way. And this is the concept of this acceptable level of risk. So in this example here on the screen, you can actually see that the acceptable level of risk is up to 6. So 6 is the last that is acceptable, whereas risks of 7, 8, 9, and 10 are not acceptable. And basically this is, okay, so you can see it now, they are, let's say now separated. So this means that basically when you go to this next step, risk treatment, you're not treating all of these risks, you're treating only the risks that are not acceptable, okay? And this acceptable level of risk is something that you have to set in your risk assessment methodology. So this is also an extra element that you have to write in this document. Okay, now let's move on to the next next slide, and this is about these 4 options for risk treatment. Basically it's so ISO 27001 basically, you know, allows you to use any kind of treatment options, but again, in most cases these 4 options are used, and out of these 4, this first one, applying appropriate controls, is the most common one. So applying appropriate controls, this basically means selecting controls from these NXA, from these 93 controls. Of course, for each risk you can select one or several controls. You can also select controls that are not listed in NXA. You can list, let's say, some controls from, I don't know, SOC 2, or from NIST cybersecurity framework, or from NIST SP800 standard series of standards. So basically you can really select any controls that you consider appropriate. If you want to be, let's say, if you want to do this risk assessment and treatment in an optimal amount of time, then you usually stick with ISO 27001 controls. The other option for actually treating or mitigating risks is this acceptance of risk. And this basically means that now in which cases you can actually use this acceptance of risk. Let's say that, for example, that you calculated that there is a risk and that the total damage, if this risk materializes, is, let's say, $10,000. Okay, you managed to calculate somehow that this is the maximum damage, and then you actually calculate that the price of implementing controls to reduce this risk is, let's say, $30,000. In other words, you have to pay 3 times more to mitigate this risk when compared to the maximum damage. What does this mean? This means that from the business point of view, it makes no sense, right? Why would you pay 30,000 to mitigate something that might happen and where the maximum damage is 3 times lower? So doesn't make sense. In this case, you simply accept the risk, okay? So accepting the risk, you can accept the risk when there is, I would say, a good business reason to do so. Another example of, let's say, accepting the risk is when you don't have the budget in this current year, which, by the way, very often happens, especially with companies that have very strict budgeting process. And then you basically say, okay, I will temporarily accept this risk during this budget year, but I will actually resolve this risk in the next year. So this is why it's temporarily, so to say, accepted. Okay, the next option is to avoid the risks. So this basically means that you're not applying certain controls, rather that you're actually eliminating the source of the risk. So for example, let's say that you have very big risks related to bring your own device, so that you're actually currently allowing employees to use their own devices for work, and that the risks are really very, very high. And then you basically say, okay, we're not going to allow this anymore. From now on, you can actually work on devices that are only company owned, right? So that instead of people are using private laptops, that they're using from now only company owned laptops. This is actually the way to avoid the risk. So you're changing the way you're doing things in order actually to reduce these risks. Okay, and then you have the transfer of risks, where basically you are actually transferring this risk to a third party, and the most common way to do it is paying an insurance policy. So for example, for the risk of let's say fire, or your your server, physical server going on fire, you can simply insure it with the insurance company. And then if this really happens, if this risk really materializes, if really your physical server goes on fire, then the insurance company will cover you at least part of the damage that you had. Usually with this transfer of risk, it's never, I would say, perfect. You can never expect the insurance company to cover the whole cost, but it's definitely one of the options that that is available. Okay, basically all of these four options are taken from this standard ISO 31000. So there is this ISO 31000 is basically a standard that describes this enterprise risk management, and it describes, and it basically covers any type of risk, not only cyber risk, but also financial risk, currency risk, whatever risks. But it does give you this concept, explains these concepts about risk management, and especially options for treating risks. So if you're interested in this ISO 31000, I'll ask my colleague now to send you this link to this article about ISO 31000 that you can find on our website, and you can read more about this. Good. Now let's move on to the conclusion, and then we'll have some time for the Q&A session. I would say, if you focus only on these mandatory elements of risk assessment and treatment only, and without really trying to push some unnecessary things into this process, then you can actually complete this risk management phase in, I would say, rather short time. And again, I would say it's very often I see companies who are trying to be too perfect with security, only to realize that this perfectness actually doesn't bring you any better security. Actually, in most cases, if you try to be too perfect with security, it actually brings you lower security, because no one else in your company is taking you seriously. So try to be, I would say, try to do your security on, I would say, adequate enough level, and not push it too much, because this, I would say, moderate approach is what will, I would say, get you accepted by, let's say, everyone else in the company. And therefore, this is why I'm suggesting you this moderate approach with doing the risk assessment. Of course, you have to, follow these 5 steps, you need to have these 5 elements that I described in the slides. But again, instead of I don't know, 1,000 risks, you can identify 100 risks or a couple of 100 risks, and you will still it will still be more than enough for your certification audit. And of course, you can use tools like 𝗂𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀 that I've shown you to speed up this listing of assets and threats and vulnerabilities. And we'll send you now also this link to schedule a call with our 𝗂𝗲𝗴𝗶 expert. And so if you want, you can sign up for this free trial on your own, or you can schedule a call with our 𝗂𝗲𝗴𝗶 expert, and he will actually show you how this risk register works in more detail. All right, now let's move on to the Q&A session. Okay, basically it's I'll actually go through some things now. I'm gonna just make a couple of announcements, but feel free to send me any questions now. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me, and I'll be more than happy to answer you. So a couple of announcements while you're sending these questions. First of all, you can reach out directly to me with any questions that you may have, and you will see my email address on the screen now. Second, you can follow me on you can follow my LinkedIn and YouTube profiles. And for example, on LinkedIn, I publish lots of news and free resources related to, ISO 27001 and cybersecurity compliance in general, and also publish news related to all of these things. Whereas on YouTube, I publish various videos which are related to not only 27001 but also lots of videos for consultants and so on. So you can find all of these links now in the chat window, and open them and start following my profiles. You can also see this Secure and Simple podcast. So this is a podcast where I focus specifically on consultants and security officers, and there I interview successful consultants so that you can actually learn from them and see how they handle various consulting projects, and where you can actually learn how to become a better consultant or better security officer. Okay, yeah, and actually the last episode that was published, this was published yesterday, and there I have this interview with one very, I would say, skillful security officer, and you will see that the topic is around how to handle cybersecurity strategy and how to align it with business strategy. So very, very interesting interview. This is with Tom Langford from Rapid7. Good. Third thing, my next webinar will be next week, next Wednesday, and it will be about how to use a documentation toolkit for ISO 27001, NIS2, and DORA. So if you're interested in learning how to use templates for your implementation projects, then you're welcome to register for this webinar, and you can see the links now also in the chat window. Okay, good. Now let's see questions. I received some questions, so let me go through them. Actually, I received some questions before the webinar, so I'll read those questions first. So Roberta was saying that he has challenges ensuring that the business and process owners are aware of the potential impact a disruption could have. It's a very good question, and basically to handle this kind of challenge, it's always good to, you can actually use two approaches. Or three approaches. So one approach would be that you're simply sending, I don't know, this methodology to everyone who needs to do the risk assessment. But to be honest, people are not able to understand these kind of documents without showing them how to work. So I wouldn't say that this first option is going to work. Second option is that you collect all the, let's say, heads of the departments and do a workshop with them. And then during this workshop, you actually show them on several examples how you do the risk assessment, okay? And then basically through this workshop, they can start doing their own risk assessment, and they can actually learn how this is done. So this second approach is certainly much, much better. And the third approach is that you do individual interviews with each head of the department, where you actually help them list all of these assets and then threats and vulnerabilities, so that you make sure that they really, think about every aspect and that this is done really properly. Of course, this third approach is the most time consuming. If you're a consultant, it's questionable whether the client is willing to pay this. If you're a security officer within the company, it's questionable whether you have time to do it. So very often you can actually take this second approach, where you organize a workshop where you teach these people how to do this, and then you will get pretty good results without actually investing too much time into this. Okay, 𝗹𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀 was saying that one of the biggest challenges that they don't have enough resources, and this is true, this is, I would say, why it's especially important that you don't try to do this risk management in a I would say, too complicated way. So try to do it simplified, make it as easy as possible, try to do it, I would say, as quickly as possible without actually endangering these minimums that are mentioned. And this is actually how you overcome mostly the problem of resources. Of course, some resources will need to be, let's say, engaged. But if you actually explain to these people how this is done, and if you explain them why this is important and how this can help how this can help actually in their own work, then you will probably you will have an easier job of handling these kind of problems. Okay, let me see some other questions that I received during the webinar. Let me find it. Okay, question from Milos. I heard you mention NIST 800-88. Well, I didn't mention actually this particular, I just mentioned this 800 series. The question is, what is your opinion on the new IEEE 2883? To be honest, I didn't read that one, so I'll actually have to take a look, and then I can get back to you to this later on. Question from Christian about the next week's webinar. I assume that this will cover all DORA requirements. So next week I will have a webinar around how to use templates, documentation toolkits for DORA and NIS2 and ISO 27001. I'll not cover all the requirements from these from DORA, but there is actually a webinar, other webinar that I already did. You'll find the recording on the webinar about DORA. And even better, actually, there is a DORA Foundations course that you'll find on our website, and this is a free course, and you can actually go through the course and learn in detail about all the DORA requirements. So my colleague will send now this link to this DORA Foundations course that you can sign up for. Okay, yeah, speaking of courses, we also have ISO 27001 courses, and I'll ask my colleague also to send the link to these various ISO 27001 courses. All of these courses are actually free, so you can sign up for free to all of these courses. Okay, there is also a question from S. Johnson. Based on risk calculations, risk equals impact times likelihood. Is this to calculate gross risk, and how would you calculate net risk? Is this something risk owners need to decide with all calculations? I'm not sure exactly what you refer to by gross and net risk. These terms are not actually prescribed or required by ISO 27001. If you refer here to residual risk, residual risk is something that is mentioned in the standard, and basically the difference between, let's say, this normal calculation of risk and a residual risk is that first, when you calculate the risk, you actually calculate without taking into account the effect of the controls that you will implement in the future. Okay, so this is what I was showing during this webinar was this, let's say, regular calculation of risk. Now, what you actually might do as a second step is to calculate, once you actually know which controls you're going to apply in the future, and then you actually calculate the residual risk, meaning the risk that will remain after you implement these controls in the future. So this is called the residual risk. So I'm not sure if this was your question, but yeah, okay, I see that this is what you're asking. So yes, this is, I hope I explained now these things. All right, good. I don't see any more questions. Let me just check. Yeah, I don't see any questions. Good, so then let me wrap up the webinar. I see that we didn't send these links to these courses yet. Okay, if not now, then we'll actually post these links in these after the webinar. You'll see now. I'll explain you now how you can see these links for these, not webinars but the courses for DORA and for ISO 27001. Good. So yeah, let me wrap up the webinar. Just a few words before we finish. So as I mentioned, this 1 hour webinar was probably too short to go into details like every threat or vulnerability or asset or whatever. But I mean, you can take a look at this 𝗂𝗲𝗴𝗲 software and play around with it and see how you can actually use it for and see what kind of risks you actually get when you start clicking all these assets and threats and vulnerabilities. And yeah, regarding the PDF presentation deck, we'll publish this PDF presentation deck, or we'll publish the link for this PDF presentation deck in LinkedIn and YouTube. And basically it will be published in the same page where you're watching the webinar now. So after the webinar ends, just stay on the same page, and then in about 10 minutes go to this comments section, and there you will see actually a link to download this presentation deck. And also we'll publish all the links that we mentioned in the webinar today, including also these links for courses. And yeah, you'll be able to open these links simply by clicking there. If you join the webinar through Zoom, then we will send you all of these links, including this link for downloading the presentation deck through email, and we'll send this email latest by tomorrow morning. And finally, we'll send you also a link to our short survey, and the purpose of this short survey is really to give me the feedback on how was I doing in this webinar. So I would appreciate if you could fill this out, and just for me to let me know what I have to improve. And this would be all. Thank you very much for your participation, and I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. Have a nice day.